Some people's stories are just gut-wrenching. I mean, they just make you sit on the edge of your chair. It's like watching some dramatic movie or something. You're wondering, what's the next thing they're going to say? And then God swoops in and saves, and everything's good. And then there's some people that have testimonies kind of like mine. When I was 12 years old, accepted Christ, and there was no big bang. It was kind of boring. It was boring to everyone but two people. To me and to Christ. The stories I think you're going to hear this evening will probably be pretty riveting. I'm just guessing here. But getting up and giving your testimony in front of a group of people can be unnerving. But for the three people that are doing it this evening, I want you to know that you're amongst friends, you're amongst your family. We love you. And thank you so much for taking this time to share this with us. Julia, you're up first. You can use that mic if you like.
Do I need to?
You don't need to. You don't want to.
Okay, for you that don't know me, my name is Julia Reinhardt. Sorry, I'm very nervous. Can't tell. So I grew up in a home that was full of dysfunction. I'm just going to go a small bit into my past because what God has done is miraculous in my life. So I grew up in a house full of dysfunction, alcoholism, drug addiction. My stepdad was a crack addict. I didn't know my father. He walked out of my life when I was 4. And it was tough. There was molestation in the house. There was mental abuse, a little bit of physical abuse with some of the kids. God always had his hand on my life because I was never touched physically, yes, emotionally, mentally. But he always protected me in ways I see now that I'm so thankful for. As I got older, 17 years old, I started drinking, drugging, doing anything I could to fill that love I felt like I didn't have when I was younger. Not that I didn't have it from my mom or my grandparents. I had so much love from them, but it was just something different. I think it was always a void of not having a father, a real, true father. I met Sean when I was 21, and we partied together. We did everything together that we shouldn't have. I see now that God brought him into my life for the reason I met Jesus. We had done so much stuff together, and Sean was just like my father. I didn't realize that my stepfather, that he also had a crack addiction problem. And I went down the same path as my mom with sticking by him. But lo and behold, one day, Sean, I told him that was it. I was done. I couldn't live with him no longer. And he said, hold on. I'm going to go to church. I've got it. Don't worry. I'm going to show you something. As everybody knows, Sean's parents are missionaries, and he grew up on the mission field. So he knew a little more than I did. So he went to church and he came home and he's like, all right, you got to get rid of everything in the house. You know, we're going to start serving Jesus. And I looked at him and I said, you're kidding me, right? You're the one with the crack addiction problem, and you're telling me I've got to give up the little bit of stuff that I do? And he said, yeah. So I said, okay, I got to see what's going on. And I go to the church that he went to, and lo and behold, I've never seen anything like it. I actually went without him that Sunday, which was really strange. He went to work, and I went to the church that he went to. And I'm sitting in the chair, and, you know, I'm feeling this hand on my back. And I'm looking behind me, and there's nobody behind me. They had done an altar call. And this hand's pushing, just nudging me, like, come on. So I go up, and I give my life to the Lord right then and there. And the transformation, you talk about a tremendous transformation. My countenance, my insides, my heart, everything completely transformed. From this angry, hurt little girl, God transformed me and gave me such love that I had never felt. That was my father. That was the father that I had always craved for, needed. So I was like, all right, here we go. Sean's going to stop. Life is good. You know, we're going to serve Jesus together. Well, went through another 6 years on a roller coaster ride with him. Not understanding why, if we're serving Christ, is he still falling back into all of his old ways? I didn't comprehend it. I couldn't grasp it. I thought that once you gave your life to Jesus, everything was going to be so perfect and so easy. It's not. You know, it's not. I know that now. So Sean got arrested and put in jail. And he got 8 months. And then he got the Teen Challenge program. And I'm sitting on my bed, and I have a 2-year-old child that I have to think about now. Yeah, I say now because I chased Sean's addiction for so long, trying to get him clean, trying to get him sober, and not realizing that I know now that I not neglected Sean Michael, but, you know, I wasn't always there. And so I'm sitting on my bed and I'm praying and I'm like, Lord, what do you want me to do? You know? He spoke to me, stick by him. Okay, I'm going to do it. You obviously have a greater plan for me than I could ever imagine. So I'm going to stick by him. Let's see how this goes. You know, you're God, you're Jesus, you're telling me to do this. So I did. I visited him in jail, went through a 12-month program with him, doing the single mom all by myself. Of course, I had family that helped, you know, and it was tough. It was the toughest thing I ever went through. But I had given my life at this church to the Lord, and they backed me up 100%. They were so loving. The Lord sent me there for that time, for that season, for that reason. Because my pastor became a father figure to me. His wife was a grandmother to my son. You know, it was just, they encased me with love. So I have the support. And so Sean graduates Teen Challenge program. He comes home, and 2 months later, he falls. My heart broke. I said, Lord, what did you just have me go through this for? I mean, all that time, I stood by him like you told me to, and this is what I get? Yes, I thought of me, and I thought of my child, and how he had just missed all this time with his father. So we went on this way for, I think it was about another year, before I finally said, Lord, I'm sorry, I'm done. I don't care what you say anymore. I'm letting go of Sean. And in that process, because I had chased Sean for so long and wanted him clean, I forgot my father for a little while. I left him. I stopped going to church. I stopped speaking with him. I put a wall up because I was so mad that I had lost the one thing I wanted, that I thought I needed more than God. We forget that in our times of troubles, how we need him. We don't need, yes, we need each other, but we don't. Our relationship should be with him, first and foremost, always. So I went back to drinking a little bit and partying, and 2.5 years went by, and Sean ended up in Shenandoah Valley Teen Challenge here, and I was so angry. How could you leave your son? No, we're not together any longer, but how could you leave your son? So selfish. Didn't know. God's plan's bigger than mine once again. And Sean starts taking Sean Michael over summers, over holidays. He starts building his relationship with his son. And I see this. I'm like, wow, you know, this isn't Sean. You know, he doesn't put anybody before himself and what he chose. I'd seen that for so long. And he started doing that. And his relationship grew with our son. And then he starts, not reprimanding me, but, you know, Julia, what are you doing? You know, you're supposed to be living for God, and you're choosing everything else, really. You're preaching to me. Here goes my self-righteous self again, you know. And I think it was 6 months later, he starts calling me for 2 weeks. And every day for 2 weeks, Sean called me and asked me back. The beginning of our conversation. conversation would be me laughing at him. No way. You know, you've got to be kidding me. I'm not going to give up. I had a job that I loved but hated. It was hard. I loved being a single mom, but I hated being a single mom. It was tough. I loved my family, and I loved my family with all my heart. But they're good for me. They like to drink, and I can fall so easily back into that if I allow myself. Just put myself out there. And so the last day, Sean calls me. I'm at work, and I'm like, man, Lord, you know how tired I am. You know, I'm tired of being a single mom. I'm tired of working at this job. I'm tired of living this life. I know how good it was being so close to you. And what do you want me to do? For the first time, I opened up my heart back to the Lord. And plain as day, go back to him. Seriously? Yeah. A peace came over me. A weight came off of my shoulders. Because I believe, yes, because I knew I was getting back with Sean, but I opened up that gateway to God once again. I opened up that door that me and him could get back into our relationship. And so Sean calls me that night and tells me, don't ask me once again, you want to get back together? And I said, yes. He about dropped the phone. Seriously? Well, we find out later on, because we hadn't really talked too much about it, and he told me that same day, he had asked God, this is the last time, Lord, that I'm asking Julia to get back with me. After today, I'm going to move on. We're going to get a divorce, and this is it. That's God for you. You know? When we think we're at the end of the road and nothing's going to change, here he changes both of our hearts and speaks to us both in the same day. So a couple months later, I pack up and I come here. And what God has done I believe because of obedience. I listened when he spoke and I did what he told me to do. In 2.5 years, our business has grown tremendously. I feel my marriage is so awesome, but it's because God is the head of it. He is the head of our household. Every time I pray and make a decision, I try and remember, God, you are the head of this household. You guide us, you lead us, you tell us everything you want us to do. It's so important, and we forget that sometimes. So, 6 months ago, I've always been content with, we were living in an apartment, I've been content with where I live. I've never been money or anything like that. But I got a stir in my spirit, and I wanted a house. I never owned anything. I never owned a house. I never owned anything. Junk cars, things like that. So I felt like the Lord was preparing me for what was to come. So we started looking. Nobody wanted to give us a loan, but we're going to look at houses anyway. Sure. Why not? God's in control. So, bless the Crockers. They came to us and told us that they had a house that they wanted us to look at, and maybe we could work something out. They could be our mortgage brokers, whatever. But it was in Edinburgh. And here I go again. I'm like, really? I'm not moving to another town, meeting more people, transferring my poor son out of school because, God forbid, you move your kid. And so I had it set in my heart. I'm like, I'm not going to like this house. I'm not going to want it. It's not going to be what I want, Lord. Pull up, and I'm like, yeah, this is Edinburgh. I'm not moving here. So we get in the house, and I'm like, ooh. And God's like, ooh, hold on, Julia. What are you doing? And as we walk through each room, yes, this house is not beautiful, but God showed me the beauty in every room. What other people seen as a dump, here he's painting walls for me. And I'm like, wow, and I feel a peace. And I'm like, you want us here, don't you? You're calling us to come here, aren't you? Well, sure enough, 2 months later, we sit down with Michael and Susan, and we're going to discuss arrangements, because I'm like, God spoke, he wants us here, let's go. He speaks, I've learned now, let's move. Let's go. So, we sit down with them, and they turn around and they're like, we don't know how to tell you this, on sat there for 5 minutes with our girls down here. His love is endless. Our obedience is what he needs. What he can do through our obedience, by listening, opening our ears and hearing him, and moving on his word, not ours, not our feelings. My feelings were I didn't want the house. God's feelings were open up that heart and I'm going to put it in your lap. It's in your name, Julia. It's yours. That's his beauty. And the things that he has done because of obedience, it's just amazing. Every time he gives me a word to stand up in front of the church, which I love with all my heart. I do not enjoy speaking in front of the church. But if I didn't share what he puts on my heart and what he tells me to, who's going to miss out on that? Who is that word for? So it's very important learning to be obedient to what God says. Very important. Open up your hearts, open up your minds, and just listen. Because I can only imagine how many blessings I've missed because I wasn't listening. Or how many people I didn't speak to because I wasn't watching what God was putting in front of me. How many people I could have shared with, It's amazing. So, that's my life.
She tells me she's nervous and she can't talk in front of people.
Can I say that her son is standing over here beside me listening to her testimony, and he's so proud and so excited.
And I was blessed with that.
Yes.
It's hard to put into words how much of a blessing Sean and Julia and little Sean have been to our church. David became our pastor. In leadership, we kept talking about that we needed something. We needed something that we could identify with. We needed something that we could pour ourselves into for the building of the kingdom. And Friday and Saturday, we're going to put a roof on that house.
Once again, God.
Oh, yeah. And for whatever reason God brought you here, we are so thankful. And you are here, and for your ministry and what you're doing in God's lives is unbelievable. You need to ask Sean sometime to see his before and after pictures. It will make you cry. I promise you.
He was skinnier than me.
It's
A lot.
It's unreal to see that. But thank you. Robin, in 5 words or less, what are you thankful for?
Family, friends. I had to swallow salvation, family, friends, God's beautiful creation, and my job.
Ed, in 5 words or less, what do you think?
Grace, mercy, family, word.
Amen. Suzanne?
Oh.
No, you're up. and we hope you have more than 5 words.
Thank you. Okay, so, do I need to use
You can? Yes. Let me unmute
I
you.
need to hold on to something.
There you go.
I was saved at 9, so I didn't have time to do a whole lot of stuff then. But it's been a continuous working out of the things in my heart that are so displeasing to God. And that's what I'm thankful for today, for sanctification. But I want to use this Thanksgiving experience because I want to share just a little bit. I love history, and I want to pull this around or kind of bring it around to share a little piece of my testimony, a present testimony. I mean, we have testimonies every day. And so I want to kind of magnify one of those. But with all that's going on in the world, I think it helps us to know our beginnings. I think it is such a blessing for us to see what God had in mind for this country. Now, we don't know everything, but we can look at history and see some things. There were two settlements that I want to talk about tonight just briefly. Jamestown was a settlement, and they left England with the idea of spreading the gospel. That's what the Virginia Company, that was their charter, and that's what they were going to do. And there was a precious, precious preacher, Robert Hunt, and he was a man of God, and he took care of his people when they were sick. He loved them. He loved the Indians. He did all that he could. But he was the only preacher, the only man of God. There were gentlemen. There were masons. There were bricklayers. There were no farmers. No one to spread the gospel or plant the seed. And so Jamestown floundered for years and didn't even plant a sustainable crop of corn to keep them alive for 20 years. And when they did decide to clean the area and plant, they planted tobacco. And the famous John Smith that we see in our history books, like pages and pages and pages about him, he was not kind to the Indians. He had heard that every Indian had a chamber pot of gold encrusted with precious stones. And that was what his heart, according to history, I don't know him, but according to history, that's what his desire was. And then there were a people in Holland who had to leave England because they wanted to worship God with their whole hearts. And they wanted to make him the Lord of their lives. And they wanted to be a city on a hill, the Pilgrims. And they came to Plymouth. And they were not headed for Plymouth. They were headed, for the mouth of the Hudson. And had they landed there, they would have all been killed. Because a great storm came up and blew them 200 miles off course. And when they got off the Mayflower, they knelt down and kissed the ground and had a Thanksgiving ceremony there. They gave praise and thanks to God for getting them there safely. What they were to find out in the next couple of months was that had they landed at the mouth of the Hudson, they would have been killed, as I said. But where they were now, in what eventually they traveled up to Plymouth, they found a big pot of 36 ears of corn waiting for them, and they were hungry. They had eaten almost all the food on the Mayflower. And so they ate that, and they thanked God because they didn't know who sent it, but they knew that it was God's provision. And then there were 20 acres of land that had already been cleared for them. And when they later on found out that it was a tribe of Indians that had cleared that land, and they all fell sick. They were a warring tribe, but they all fell sick and died. And so this land was prepared and ready for them to get off the Mayflower, build their houses, and do what they needed to do. And they were very grateful. Before they even left the Mayflower, they wrote the Mayflower Compact, which is the basis for our government today, for our Constitution. And the beginning of the Mayflower contract was, in the name of God, amen. So be it. These were a people who loved their God. These were people who weren't pointing fingers at their neighbors. They didn't wear black even. But they loved God with all their hearts. And it was a hard time. Yes, there were provisions, and every time God provided, they were grateful. That first Thanksgiving, they had survived and they were excited and they had just enough food to last them through the winter. And here comes the chief Massasoit with 90 Indians, and they're all going, oh no, here goes our food. But Massasoit loved them and brought deer and turkeys, 12 turkeys I think, and all good food. Before that Thanksgiving though, one day they were in their little common living area and an Indian came to the door. And he kind of stood there and just kind of looked around, and he spoke English. And he told them how blessed they were. He had been to England. He had been captured and taken to England where he learned the language. And he said, told them about the tribe that had lived there and had all died out. And Samoset then introduced them to Squanto. And Squanto was an Indian that had lost his family, his tribe. He was alone. And he found so much pleasure in taking care of the colonists, of the pilgrims, because that gave him a reason to live. He showed them how to plant corn with 4 fish pointing in, the square and the seeds. And he taught them how to make maple syrup, plant pumpkins. He taught them how to fish. He taught them how to trap. And it was that trapping of beaver that many times over saved them from starvation because they could trade. After that first Thanksgiving, and they were feeling pretty good, and all of a sudden 35 more pilgrims come from England to live with them. Their provisions would not carry them through the winter with these 35, but they said, our God will provide. You are welcome. We'll take care of you. You come in. These were hardships. This was not easy. It was called the starving winter. It was the winter of starving. And they eventually had 5 kernels of corn a day to keep them alive. But they were able in the spring to plant crops, to plant corn again. And that spring, they planted everywhere you could see. They even, instead of common ground, they started giving families plots of ground. So everybody was excited, and they were planting corn everywhere. And they said, we will not starve again. And then the months went by, no rain. And the crops began to dry up. The corn began to dry up. But no one shook their fist at God and said, why? But they knew well the scripture, 2 Chronicles 7:14, and they fasted and prayed, and they called on their God, and they were humble before their God, and they said, God, how have we missed it? Not, God, why are you doing this to us? How have we missed it? And they realized through this that they were depending on the corn to keep them alive. They were making the corn their God. They repented and they worshiped God. And in 3 days, they had the most gentle rain ever to have been known to that point. It rained for 3 days, such a gentle rain, didn't knock the corn down. And they had then that October a bounty of corn that they could trade. It would carry them through the winter. And that was the first notable Thanksgiving, where they all praised and gave thanks to their God. But as they sat down to eat, and they had a lot of good stuff, popcorn, maple cakes, but when they sat down to eat the first course on their plates, they had 5 kernels of corn. And they took the corn and they thanked God. Now the reason this is a testimony, I love Christian history, but But it's my testimony because of this. They wanted to be a city on a hill. They wanted to be what God wanted to make them. These are times, the times in which we live are serious times. I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, but I know that what is important is our God and what He provides for us. And right now, He has provided eternal life. And this, we're just in earth suits, hanging out down here, letting Him work all that yucky stuff out of our hearts so we can live with Him forever. I've floundered around for the last 10 years, praying, God, show me a church, show me a people like those pilgrims. Show me someone that loves you more than they love themselves. Show me someone who isn't pointing a finger, but show me someone who is willing to lay down their lives. And I want you to know, congregation, and many of you that are not even here tonight, you are that people. I have never seen a people as kind and loving, as generous. They give their houses away. They take in their grandchildren and raise them and help their daughter be strong and make a good life. I've never seen people so selfless as you. When our pastor stood up one Sunday and couldn't preach, all he could do was weep. And I saw in that the birth of this thing that I've prayed for I was saved at 9, for 50-some years, for 40-some years. That is this church, this people, not this building. I don't want a church that all you think about is church growth and, oh, let's build this building or let's build that building. Let's take in the people who have addictions. Let's help them walk. Let's live with them. Let's provide for them. Let's care for them. Let me give a house. Let me take someone into my home and love them. Let me just see someone on the street and say, you are precious. God loves you. This life is so amazing with God. I am so grateful, though it took a few years. I count it just as yesterday to be here with you. You are a city on a hill. The glory of God shines from you, as Jesus talked about in Matthew 5, I guess. And you can't hide. We want to share the gospel, but I'm telling you right now, you can't even hide it. You can't put a bushel on you. It shows. It ekes out of your pores. I didn't know anything you did before I came here. I just saw you. I saw you shining. I saw the joy. I saw the faithfulness over the years. And I loved it. So that's my testimony. I was saved at 9. It's been a lot of years just letting God work out a lot of stuff. But I've seen this baby born. And I'm saying, no matter what goes on this earth, you are called of God to be the light bearers in this town, in this city, in this world. And don't you get tired. Don't you falter. Don't you trip. And if you do, He'll pick you up, because He's picked me up so many times. I love you. And I thank you for opening your doors to me. And thank you, Pastor. Pastors.
It's been some time ago, I think we were doing the first song worship set, and I looked back at the door and I saw Suzanne come through the door. And I remembered the excitement and anticipation I had of seeing you come through that door. And what she just said to us is the evidence of that. For the regulars, you all know this. For our visitors that are with us tonight, we have a lot of strong women in this church. A lot of strong women in this church. And I'll tell you this, in the years that New Hope's been together, in the 15 plus years, the women are the ones that was the glue that held this church together to get us to this day. Suzanne, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for being with us, being a part of our family. Thank you so much. Bruce, 5 words or less. What are you thankful for?
Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and friends.
Amen. Janet?
Well, I
Sister
don't
Laura?
want to say ditto, but that was awesome. That was perfect.
When it is, it is.
I'm also thankful for my ongoing walk.
For my ongoing walk.
There you go.
Beautiful. Way to
That's
go.
what I'm very thankful.
Awesome. Our last one this evening is Andrew for sorrow. Andrew?
Well, when Andy asked me to do this, I kind of, you know how it is when you are supposed to do something, and the devil starts beating you up about how you can't do it, you shouldn't do it, shut up. It culminated this evening with being late right before I got here. My wife, y'all are laughing. She's not laughing. That's my lowest point when anyway, so, but the reality is, it's really about God, testimonies about God and His work in imperfect people, very imperfect people. So, I guess in that case, I'll still proceed. Although I did think about rolling by. So, I want to read a really quick verse first to start in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 10. He found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of the wilderness. He encircled him. He cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, then flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them. The Lord alone guided him. So, I was born, my mom and dad were friends in high school. Summer of '86, went to see Top Gun. It was pretty good movie. Got carried away, afterwards. So, that's kind of how I came into existence. I really wish my mom hadn't told me that, sort of. But it is kind of cool, too.
I'm just going to call you Goose from now on.
So, that wasn't a traditional way. My mom was the youngest of 8 kids. My grandpa was a pastor, helped start over like 100 Christian schools. And he was in the House of Delegates, and he was one of these big guys that was supposed to have flowers running around, having that kind of fun. So, it could have been ugly. And my mom was running with the wrong crowd in that time, trying to prove a point, doing things she shouldn't have been doing. I've said to her many times, I'm really thankful to be alive. It would have been a lot easier, especially in the culture then and now, and a lot of times, to snuff me out. But she decided that to love me and to deal with whatever came from that decision. So that's probably the first best thing that happened to me. Just getting a chance. So I was born, and obviously, my mom was still a kid. So Dad and her decided they were going to, they were friends, and that's how it was going to end. Mom thought it would be better for me to not have a dad in my life at all, rather than have a half of a dad, which, in retrospect, I don't know that she was right about, but she was just trying to love me, and so that's what happened. So I actually did not meet my biological dad until I was 16, and Marielle was with me, but I met my dad physically there. It was pretty cool. Anyway, so I grew up with my grandparents, and so like I said, it was a Christian home in the sense that I always went to Christian schools and I learned theology, and my grandpa baptized me when I was a baby. So I really, God says He knew us in the womb. I really believe that I was always a Christian in that sense. I mean, I was always God's child. David says God's a father to the fatherless, and I mean, parents aren't supposed to have favorites, but I feel like, if you did have a favorite, God's been pretty kind to me. So, nevertheless, my mom married a guy when I was almost 4, and things started changing, and things were kind of rough. So, my father, my biological father, was never there. And I didn't even realize until I was an adult and had kids, the way God creates us, and when He tells us to do things, it's because He's hardwired us for life to work and things to be good if we do it, and things not if we don't. And the devil makes us see all the temporary fun and or whatever that happens when we disobey, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so it got ugly, and I didn't realize until I was an adult. That's what I'm saying. Really, just having a father. I mean, you're created to need that. And they say you can't miss something you don't have. You didn't have it. That's not true. Anyways, fortunately later I realized I had the best father the whole time. But so yeah, I mean, without tons of details, it was rough. I mean, we were poor. That was just one of the stressors. My stepdad was very, very angry and violent, and all of that stuff. So, we'll skip the stories, but you get the drift. When I was 12 years old, we moved to Stephen City. My mom and my stepdad and I. We had been living in Northern Virginia before that, and I was, like I said, I knew who God was. I knew Jesus. I believed it the whole time, but it really wasn't. It wasn't really my relationship in the sense that I was engaged in it. And I somehow, we were hardline theology, but it was the opposite. We didn't get treated that way. Like, there was no Jesus. It was all the doctrine and stuff, which there's a lot of good stuff in. But without Jesus, it's all just man's crap, and that's what I was experiencing. So one day, somehow in my house, there was one of the Jesus movies, where you watch the Jesus. It's the story of Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth or something, and it's terrible acting, and but for whatever reason, I was at home alone, and I watched it, and I was surprised, really, and I still am, that it was even in my house, because that was like wishy-washy, to watch a Jesus movie. We should have just been reading a Calvin or something. But anyways, I watched the Jesus movie. I really saw the Jesus. I saw Jesus, not because of the movie, but it became real to me in a way it hadn't been before. I said the sinner's prayer at the end of the thing, and I remember going outside and literally sprinting and jumping for joy and stuff. And I feel like that was the first time that the Holy Spirit kind of let me know He was there with me. So then things got uglier because I was a teenager at that point. So of course I was a sinful teenager with a sinful, crazy dad. So it was a perfect storm. I ended up meeting my dad and moving to live with him in Charleston. My dad is an Episcopal priest, and he has a really great family besides me. So it's really hard because really he was the best dad I'd ever seen. And of course, when you grow up the way you did, you're always watching dads, right? So you're like, who's the great dad? And then you're friends with cool dads or whatever. So you're always kind of watching what you're looking for. And it was really weird because I realized that my biological dad, who was not a dad to me, was an amazing dad. So hey, it's probably good for those set of kids because he was probably making up, over time for me. But hey, that's all water under the bridge. Anyways, lived with him and I went to the Marines. I spent my whole life trying to, even though my stepdad was the way he was, I still did nothing but want to please him. Boys want to make their dads proud. And I built my whole identity around what he thought was cool. Every band he told me was cool, that's the music I like. Everything I got into. I worked in a steel fabricating shop because he worked in a steel fabricating shop. He kind of told me that being a Marine was the measure of a man, which it's not. But I did become a Marine. So I really did. Even in pain, I was still trying to please him. It never really worked out. You find out later, God's there all the time. So I was in college in the reserves in the Marine Corps, and I was getting straight A. Or not getting straight A's. You would think I was getting. I was squared away. I was doing pretty well in school. I worked in the dean of students' office. I had professors come to Marielle and I's wedding. Marielle and I met when we were 15. I fell in love with her. She had the opposite kind of life. So I kind of gravitated to her. She was really grounding for me. Her family's been, and her have been like a rock for me, an anchor for 13 years. And that's a whole other testimony in itself. Bottom line is, I wasn't cool like it looked. I was really hurting, and I was having a lot of depression and things. I was using drugs, not just smoking weed. I was using hard drugs because you can't smoke weed in the Marines to calm down because then you're going to get P tested and you're going to get in trouble. So there's other things you can do. It moves through your system a little quicker to numb the pain. So that's what I did. Marielle stayed with me. It was really cool.
In all fairness, because I didn't know.
She didn't know.
Oh my goodness.
So I finished college, got out of the Marines. Marielle and I were getting married. That was all happening in about a 60-day time frame. That was pretty crazy. And I had really struggled with my faith in college. Growing up in Christian schools, the Christian schools I grew up in, we were never even taught the theory of evolution because it was just, we believe in six-day creation, and there's not even any, the way I was taught, there wasn't even any room for any of the science in evolution that is somewhat legitimate. So regardless of where you stand on that, the point is, when I was taught it objectively, it really kind of rattled me a little bit because a lot of it does make sense. But when you try to put God in a box and say he couldn't have done it this way, he only did it this way, then and then you see that there might be something there. Anyway, it just really shook me to my core. Plus, when you do drugs and don't do what God wants you to do, it does the same thing. So, there was a lot of factors there. Actually, almost minored in religion just because I was so into, I did not know where I was, that I just started taking all these religion classes. And religion at a secular school was really interesting because I had never experienced that. All in all, God used it to strengthen my faith, but at the time it was not. So right before we got married, I actually told Marielle that I wasn't sure I was a Christian because I was still rotten, but I really loved and respected her. And I thought she should know what she was getting into. I've always told on myself, you know what I mean? I'm kind of one of those guys. I don't do lies. That's one thing that I don't do very well. So I couldn't come up here and say I was in a great mood when I showed up, because I wasn't. So I told Marielle, and whatever, we decided, Marielle said she stayed with me and we got married because she had done all the planning. I'll tell you this, we got engaged because, see, I was a freshman in college when we got engaged because Marielle was squared away. When I had moved to Charlottesville, I ended up getting a year behind in high school and all this stuff, so she was finishing her master's degree, and I was like just starting my undergrad, and I was like, look, it was an economical decision. I was like, listen, she's going to be around all these resident doctors and stuff in grad school. I was like, I got to put a tag on that. So I scraped together some money and put her on layaway. You know? We had to do layaway a lot growing up. Most of the time we never went back and bought the stuff though. Fortunately, I still got to keep her, you know. If you think I'm crazy, she's crazy just to even stay with me. But anyway. So we got married, and it was really ugly. You know, my wife, she's got a great testimony too. She had stuff she was walking through, and our first several months of marriage, it was brutal. There was no honeymoon to it. It was brutal. And but we stayed together. So she says she just stayed together because of the planning. I really believed that God, like I said, I knew what was up. I knew God was there. I believed in Him. I knew it was the truth. I was just deciding not to. I was hurt, and I was just going to numb things and instead of trying to figure things out, instead of falling on my knees, I was going to walk myself, and it didn't work. But I knew God brought us together, and He kept us together, and that. So when we got married, for me it was more. I knew God was going to do something, and He did. So after some time, we ended up at New Hope, and it was kind of part of us coming back together again. Honestly, we bought a house and got our own house. That was really good, and we came to New Hope, and God just started changing us, especially me, I'm sure. And let me read another verse real quick. I'm going to read here about the prodigal son, and I know you know the story. Sometimes even when you know the story, it's nice to hear the words again, especially the ones in red. So this is right after the prodigal son's like, dude, I'm done. I've got to go back. He arose and came to his father. When he was still a long ways off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. So, that's basically what happened. God pulled me back. And I love that part where it says when he was still a long ways off. God says, seek and you shall find. It doesn't matter where you're at. Just look at him. Just stop doing what you're doing. Look at him. And he ran to meet his son. It's like, is that him? And then, that's just beautiful. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what God did to me.
Yeah.
And he just flipped my life around. People that knew me then wouldn't even recognize me. And I've still got a long ways to go. But I guess that's pretty much it. Being a dad has been super important in my walk. When Jax was born, the next day I went to the bookstore to get a cup of coffee and take 5 minutes to myself. And I found a book called Who Do You Think You Are, which is by Mark Driscoll. It's about your identity in Christ and as God as your Father. And the timing was just obviously, this is the first book I saw. It had just come out. It's like God made him write it for me. And, that was really the beginning. And then God just showed me, I love my boys so ridiculously, and so imperfectly. And so I just realized if that's how much I love them, how much more does he love me? And listen, Jesus said, greater man hath no greater love than to lay down his life for his friends. I will lay down my life for you guys. Okay? I mean that. But I'm not laying down my son's life for you. And God did that.
Amen.
Yes.
Last thing. All right. So the spirit of thanksgiving. And this is 1 John chapter 3, verse 1. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are.
New Hope has a lot of strong men in it too.
Yes.
But there was a time when, if you look at it merely from demographics, we had a demographic missing. It was the 20 and the 30-something strong men